And it's being able to be okay with that person and say, I understand. I've been there too. And just accept that spot that they're in. And also understand that no matter what brought them in, for some reason they came through the door.
Welcome to Positive Recovery MD. If you're listening, chances are you want to create happiness around you and thrive in your life. We're glad you're here and you've come to the right place. This podcast will inspire and motivate you to not merely survive your recovery journey. We'll give you the tools to build or strengthen your foundation to thrive and flourish in your life. In each episode, we will come together as a community to have authentic conversations around addiction, recovery, and what matters, growth and progress, not perfection, all while developing positive habits for you to utilize. To learn more, please visit positiverecovery.com/podcasts to sign up and to receive the daily positive interventions that we'll review, as well as gain access to exclusive Positive Recovery content available only to Positive Recovery MD listeners. All right, let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the Positive Recovery MD podcast, where we explore the transformative power of recovery and the many ways it shapes our lives, relationships, and sense of purpose. Today, I'm your host, Jamie Damaris, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today as we dive into an inspiring conversation about love, connection, and the incredible ways they impact our journey as human beings and as individuals in recovery. Today, we have a truly special guest, someone whose story embodies resilience, transformation, and the power of connection. Joining me is Tom Dodson. Tom is someone I deeply admire, not just for his decades of sobriety, because he's been sober since January 6, 1993, but also for the profound impact that he's made through his work in the recovery field and his dedication to living a life of compassion and service. Tom was born and raised in Houston. He grew up in Bel Air, and his journey has been anything but ordinary. His path has taken him through the highs and lows of life, including time spent in prison, where he began to cultivate a daily meditation practice that has remained a cornerstone of his life for nearly 32 years. He's also been actively involved with the Human Kindness Foundation since 1993, an organization that's dedicated to bringing hope, forgiveness, and spiritual growth to incarcerated individuals. In this episode, we'll talk about the central role love and connection have played in Tom's recovery, how meditation has shaped his ability to connect with himself and others, and the lessons he's learned about healing relationships, whether it's within families, recovery communities, or even within ourselves. So whether you're in recovery, supporting a loved one, or simply curious about the profound ways love and connection can transform lives, this episode is for you. So let's get started. Tom, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. So Tom, tell us how HKF, the Human Kindness Foundation, made an impact on you.
They offered me an opportunity to explore spirituality. I was already in recovery, and I'd been in recovery before. And part of one of my problems with, the recovery 12-step programs was the spirituality as I perceived the literature, which was, at that time was uncomfortable for me. And what they gave me, Human Kindness Foundation gave me an opportunity to have a interfaith dialogue where, and I was always curious about why one group of people was in and another group of people was out when we're all human. And so I wanted to be able to embrace all people's paths. And they do that. Now, initially, they weren't all that fond. They felt like AA was kind of militaristic, in its presentation, but they softened about that over the years and now warmly embrace 12-step recovery and see it from a different light. And with them, because they were directly dealing with people with how do you change and get on a spiritual path while incarcerated, so you could turn your cell in prison into like a monk's cave and meditate daily, to start trying to treat people with kindness. I joined a spiritual group, an order called Communion and Community. And the Communion and Community, I took vows, and work with a sponsor through the mail, and just every day started doing, making incremental improvement while I was also at the same time working an AA program with a sponsor in AA. So I was doing both things at the same time. Fortunately, I was introduced. There was a counselor in there who was a metaphysical AA guy. Very, not the norm 30 years ago, particularly. And he gave a lot of guidance to me that allowed me to just kind of keep seeing the lessons in things I would have been mad about. In the vows we took, one of the interesting things for me was pornography that's like soft porn. The Playboy, Penthouse magazine thing was a common way that people had some form of satisfaction. It was legal to have them in prison. And I never thought it was causing any harm. And the Human Kindness Foundation said, every woman that's in there, whether you think she's there of her own volition or not, is somebody's mother, sister, daughter, child, and being able to honor them in that, from that perspective, it made me see things differently. And I'll tell you, since then, for the last 37 years, I haven't looked at pornography. There was these shifts. Nonviolence was one. I haven't used a weapon, carried a weapon, in prison or outside, and I've been out since 2008. So I haven't had a need to have a weapon, nor have I ever been in a situation where I felt like I sure wish I had one. Before I felt like I carried one all the time, and I felt like that I needed to have one because I was always in a situation where it was going to be something I was going to use. It's very interesting, to have, the being able to do things with them. They gave me permission to do things in there to just try something different.
Let's talk about that for a second, because you were incarcerated when you were introduced to them.
Yes.
And prior to being introduced to them, you tried to get sober. It didn't work from what I'm hearing.
Right. That's correct. I had been sober for a year and a half one time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so your behaviors got you where you were. What was your view on people and humanity and like connection and love at that time prior to meeting them?
In a lifestyle that I lived before, I always had a small group of people that I would like be friendly with, but then what we did is we talked trash about almost everybody else. I don't care whether they were, some national figure or whether they were somebody, that was lived in the next house or it doesn't make any difference. But I'd have 3 or 4 people I could be friendly with that were it was a very familial in a kind of a negative environment way. I believe there's a sense I have today is that I was always looking for a family, to be connected in a familial way. And so, but like in a wing in prison where there's 80 or 120 guys in one living area, people would make little groups in there. They get along with other people just to not start anything, create any friction, but they rarely really cared about the majority of the people. Very cliquish, clannish. And I started, once I got with Human Kindness Foundation, I started thinking about ways of doing things to try to embrace everybody there, even people I didn't really have that much fondness for, and treat them all equally, try to be kind to every one of them. And there was a lot of ways I would do that. I started giving away soups for free. It's a 25 cent at that time anyway, ramen noodle soup. It's no big deal, but when you're hungry and the food they're feeding you in the chow hall isn't sufficient, a ramen noodle soup, man, is a meal, So I started a free soup kitchen, and people told me, well, you can't do that because they sold them 2 for 1. So you could borrow a soup from somebody, but you paid twice that amount that you borrowed back later. And I started just giving them away for free. And somebody says, you can't do that. These people are going to take advantage of you. And there would be people who came up and tried to prove to me that what I was trying to do was going to fail by getting things that they didn't need, but I gave it to everybody that came and asked for them. And then I'd see those guys who weren't really bad people. They were it was something new to them. It was unusual. And so what they would do would be come and borrow the soups, knowing they didn't have to pay them back. And then they'd watch to see what was happening. And then I had guys that after 2 weeks, they'd go to the store commissary and they'd buy the soups that they'd borrowed and bring some other ones. And they'd say, I'm going to put some soups in that thing that you're doing, but I'm watching you because I think you're doing something, you're up to something. And I started that because at 99.99, Y2K was coming up, and the whole prison system was wackadoo because they thought their commissary card wasn't going to work, everything was going to fail, and there was this fear. And I could sense the fear was so palatable that I thought, what if we do something different to try to shift their energy, right? Can we shift their energy? I started that soup kitchen in an effort to do that. I thought we'd make it up to Y2K, and then see how that went. And it also took me to my sobriety birthday, which is on January 6th. And I thought, and then when I got to that point, that one thing we made it, there wasn't anything that happened. So they learned that experientially that they were fearful about nothing. And it was a perceptual shift. I would do things like there was at Christmas, I would, every people that have family outside, which is it's a small percentage of people in any prison that have actual connections with their family or someone that cares about them, unless it's a church that's adopted them or something like that. But generally speaking, they don't have family on the outside, or if they do, they don't do anything to communicate with them, send them anything. So you would see Christmas would come around, cards come in the mail. Maybe 20% of the tank gets some sort of mail where they get cards. The other percentage, 80%, get nothing. And so I thought, I can do something, and so the next year I made these little bitty cards that said angels all around you on the outside of it, handmade card. I'm not an artist, but it would just like a halo and a smiley face with and then I put angels all around you. And inside I wrote something specific to each individual on the tank. Then I went to the commissary and bought 80 10-cent mint sticks. And then what I do is at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning on Christmas morning, I'd get up and walk around and put a mint stick and a card on each person's table and put one on my own table so they couldn't figure out that I was the guy that did it, and then when they wake up, they'd see that, oh man, somebody thought about me. And then what they do is they think, well, they're special. Then they look and they saw the guy next to him had one, and the guy over there had one. And then that guy over there that nobody likes, he had one. And then now they don't know what's going on because everybody in there was friendly with some people, but not everybody was friendly with everybody. And it was, I got away with it for a couple of years before somebody figured out it was me. And I kept doing it anyway. And it was just to shift their energy. I always have felt like that, like where you and I have worked together, the thing that you do there, the thing that I tried to do when I was there is make a shift in the energy of the whole, impact a few people in a way that impacts other people to change the energy.
Yes. I love that. And what I was wondering was where I know when you're in it, it's hard to tell the shift has been made. What really transpired? What was your burning bush, your epiphany moment that had you buy into what they were saying? Because, I did some looking into, because I had never heard of this foundation. And so your first introduction to them was just, do they carry a group there?
They don't. Somebody had the book and that we're all doing time, and I got a copy of it. And I also I'd known about them being there, but I also decided to get sober again. And there was a good, Ann Richards was in office. And so she was super friendly to recovery in the penitentiary, and they were making recovery dorms in there. And so that gave me an opportunity to do the equivalent of IOP there, in the facility. They had a lot of meetings coming in from the outside. And so there were volunteers. So I got living examples on like a weekly basis of people that were bothering to drive 90 miles from Houston to come up into the woods of East Texas and bring an AA meeting. And so those guys were setting a model for me. And I will say this, what didn't happen the first time I was sober that did happen this time was that in a very short period of time, the compulsion to use was removed. The first time I was sober, I was sober a little more than a year and a half. My ego and pride as a man got tired of going to another man to tell him I was having a feeling about the thought to use, not an overwhelming compulsion, but that every time I had a thought about it, I'd been going to my sponsor. And so I didn't tell on myself, right? And I got away with it once or something. Then the next time, man, I relapsed. And they warmly welcomed me back, took all the pressure off of me so I could, just like we might at Positive Recovery, just say, hey, man, take it easy on yourself. We care about you as a human being. They did all that. Go to meetings for you. But I was sitting in those meetings having had a year and a half, which felt like a lifetime to me as a kid. And I'm sitting in there with somebody that's got 15 days and they got more time than I do. Oh, man, my ego could not take that. And it's only in hindsight that I realize now that when I went back out again, it was about my ego.
Yeah.
But you don't see that stuff a lot of times in the moment. Shoot yourself in the foot, as they say in AA.
Well, there's connection, right? Which is the opposite of addiction.
Right.
We're yearning for connection and always have been, and meaning and purpose. But when you come to the word love is such that they've studied love. Like there's so many different aspects to it. And what I kept returning to was self-love, because, and it sounds like what you're speaking to is that at some point you started to give yourself some love and start loving yourself, to start taking some different actions in what you were doing. And then what happened was you were introduced to some people which actually had you expand on that, which is to turn it around and give it back, which is kind of the principle of the 12 steps. But in the way that you were doing it,
right,
it's not limited to the scope of the people that walk in the rooms, but to every human being, whether in prison or outside of prison, in the rooms or outside the room.
Correct.
Yeah. So did you feel that transition happened, or was it something that later down the line you started to uncover?
For me, the guy that I was working with then, one day I told him, he said, man, I love you. And he told me this, and it made so much sense to me. It made me shift how I see love. He said, Tom, he says, I've seen in your fourth and your fifth step, the way you treat people that you love. He says, I don't know if I can stand to be loved by you. He says, but if you can just accept me as I am today and not expect me to have to change to be anything different, he says, then I'm going to qualify that as love. And I've really shifted to the way I see love today is about that. Can I accept you as you are? Not thinking only if you do this, change that, once you get better or something, And it really, I think that's what we do with the new person in recovery, is take them right where they're at and say, and I know you've said in so many interviews, as I have, of people that are coming in and they are just squirrely. And sometimes they make good sense, but lots of times they don't make any sense at all. Sometimes they're very oppositional, they're opinionated, whatever, and it's being able to be okay with that person and say, I understand. I've been there too. And just accept that spot that they're in, and also understand that no matter what brought them in, for some reason they came through the door, and whether that's an AA meeting or into treatment, it doesn't really matter particularly. They're there. And that's the action. They took that action for whatever pushed them. It doesn't matter.
That's one of the most courageous actions too. Mm-hmm. And they're not even aware it could have been something forced, but really, yes, to meet them where they're at and allow them their journey, their process. I would probably be safe to say nobody forced that book on you in prison. It was just there. And when you were ready to pick it up, you picked it up.
That's right. It's interesting too, because you said epiphany, and my sobriety birthday is the epiphany. And at the time I got sober on that date, I didn't even know what the epiphany was or that I got sober on the epiphany. I was still smoking weed in the treatment tank. And somebody went and reported this to the counselors, and the counselor came to me and he says, Tom, are you smoking marijuana up there in the living quarters? And I said, that's kind of a personal question. He says, it's not a personal question. It's a yes or a no question. And do you want to be completely sober? And that means marijuana and everything. And I had to think about it. And he says, and I don't want you to say it. And he said, not for your mama, not for your wife, not to have a job or get anything out of it. Can you just do it for you? And no one had ever asked me about just getting sober, completely clean and sober for myself. I was always doing it for somebody, influence how somebody else was going to treat me or something like that. And once I agreed to do that, then I'm pretty good about, like, if I say I will do something, I try to do that thing that I said I'll do. And I did it. And I will say that just the compulsion was removed pretty quickly. And that's the miracle. And I've had a thought, but I've never had a craving. I mean, I haven't ever relapsed in that period of time, 32 years.
Congratulations, by the way. I missed that at the beginning when I was introducing you, but I was like, wait, we're like we're in the middle of January.
Yeah.
So congratulations. 32 years?
2 years, yeah.
That's outstanding. Hold on. What year was it again?
1993.
So my first treatment center was in 1989, right? So like I have 18 years, but I would have been up there with you if I would have gotten it the first time. But our paths are our paths, and they're that for a reason, because we wouldn't be having this conversation if I would have stayed up, gotten it right the first time, which is what I want to ask you about. So you have this transformation, and then you get released and you're out in the world. Like, what was that transition like, and like creating and finding new connection and new purpose? Because when you were in the facility and creating the soup kitchen and doing the Christmas cards and stuff, in the transition out, it's almost like you have to start all over.
Right. Well, and interestingly, so I had to do 20 calendar years to become eligible for parole. So when I came up, by this time I'd been sober a few years. I came up in 2007. I got arrested in 1987. So so I had 20 years in then. And so I go to see the board, and the guy told me, he said, gosh, you look really good. You talk well. You've gotten a college education. You haven't been in any trouble. You're involved in the recovery. Man, you really look good. He said, but man, your record is, like terrible. And he says, probably next time after they set you off this time, you'll have a good chance. And I said, well, I appreciate that observation. I said, but in your system, and I've looked at their system. I mean, it's just it's a numbers game. And then somebody makes a decision based on that. But I had an 11% chance to make parole in their system, And I told that guy, I says, right now I have, and this is about like being optimistic about being the one guy out of 10 in the room that's going to make it, what they say in AA sometimes. But I told that guy, I said, I got a one square on a shotgun pool, I haven't had a square on the shotgun pool for 20 years, and
better than 1 out of 100.
There you go, baby. I got one. I got a shot, and I said, I just like, and I said, I understand your position, but I got a square. All I'm going to tell you, I'm in the game, My family came to see me after they met with the initial voter. You have to get 2 out of 3. And so the initial voter voted for me. And it only took one more, and it was right before Thanksgiving. It was the weekend just before Thanksgiving, and they came to visit me, told me the news. I said, "Great!" So I go in and talk to my boss, and I'd never asked him for a favor. I didn't ask him for a favor then. I just kind of would talk to him like a friend. I'd been working for him for 15 years. On his way out, the head of the Board of Pardons and Paroles was somebody he knew from his church group and his political affiliation. And they met at the desk, and he wasn't expecting to see her, didn't know she was there. And they talked, and he said, hey, and she said, can I do anything for you? And he says, yeah, I need a hug. She said, well, I'm not going to hug you out here in this hall in front of these inmates, but when we get outside, I'll give you a hug. They went out. He gave her he got his hug from her. She says, you sure you can't do anything else? And I can't do anything else for you. And he said, well, since you asked, I've got a guy that I really think is probably going to be able to make it if he can get, but he's got one vote and he needs a second vote. She says, well, send me his information. They kept on talking. Then she said, don't send it to me. Give it to me right now. And so he gave it to her then. Now that's a Monday. On Wednesday, which was the anniversary of the day my dad got killed, I got a notice on express mail that I'd made parole, which is like this miracle of miracles kind of thing, you know. Then I get out. I had to go to a pre-release program, and I got out the day before Mother's Day of 2008, you know, and my mom's health was declining, and, you know, my family, I said, man, you know, I didn't know she was in this bad a shape, you know. And they said, yeah, we don't know, you know, she's been hanging on. We think she was waiting for you to come home, you know, and I got to be with her for about another year and a half and help take care of her, you know, and like making amends, a living amends, man, just being there with her and spending some time with her, you know. And my mama, I'd been in prison for a long time. My mom, and I found in her bookshelves, she had saved from when I got sober in 93, she had saved every letter and card, like as if from a maternal instinct point of view, she knew that I was going to do right. She saved every letter and card that I'd written her, not from the before, but from that point forward. I came home and I found them, and I thought, oh my gosh, they were on a catalog order and everything. It's like this. The universe is a very interesting place, you know, and you can't plan that stuff or know that stuff, and there's no way to predict it. You just have to position yourself, man, to be able to be connected with there is something better and bigger in the world, and it's just believing in that and then living in that energy. And I think every day we go by and there's stuff that we get in judgment about, and I just have to be able to sit back and look and know that's me. Everything's going pretty darn good. I haven't been in debt the whole time I've been out. I don't have a phenomenal amount of money, but I've never been in debt. You know, I pay off my credit card every month. At the end of the month, I zero it out. I live what I would call frugally, you know, but it's okay. I got a pretty darn good life, you know.
I want to back up to oh man, like there's a couple of things, and one of them was your mom saving the letters, and as if she knew, right? From that specific day that you made it, and then you said it's a really interesting world, and my mind was thinking, and it was about the energy that we give, right? And it's all energy, the belief, the emotion, it's energy. And I might misquote this. There's a study out there where they were able to measure energies like emotion, and that when an emotion meets another person emitting that emotion, that they're like energies. And when the like energies meet, they expand and multiply.
Right.
You've heard this?
Yeah.
And do you know what the number one energy that multiplies the greatest is when it meets the like energy?
Probably acceptance or love.
See, love. That was what I thought.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. It's authenticity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I started thinking about that. And how can you love without it?
Yeah.
Right. So when you started, what we talked about was self-love, when you made that commitment to get sober, which then opened up many other doors, your mom knew. It was as if that energy traveled.
Right. Right. It's crazy.
It is.
And you know, and it's like, you know, when things happen and they seem random and it's really not so random. All of a sudden somebody will just walk in, or somebody calls, just that one person calls, and then there's this connection, and you have a thought. And I think I get intuitive thoughts all the time. I think we all get thoughts all the time, but it's the intuitive thought where you go ahead and pick up the phone and call somebody or send them a text, and they say, I was just thinking about you. Not every thought is an intuitive thought, but it's when I follow through with something. How many times does that happen to you? I mean, it happens to me a lot.
One of my favorite quote unquote teachers, Joe Dispenza, speaks to it. And he says, when synchronicity starts to happen in your life, and you start to notice the synchronicity, stay on that path. Keep doing what you're doing because it's all starting to line up. When moments like that happen, it's like, I'm supposed to be right here.
Right.
This is where I'm supposed to be. And I find that the more I'm aligned with my authentic self, the more I see that. And it's a challenge, right? Because we're living in a world that has distractions everywhere. Like people make money off of distracting us, or different things distract us, but it's up to us to have our daily practices. So, which is another form of self-love. So I kind of want to go into the transition of when you were released and like what that looked like as you transitioned and adapted, and what some of the practices are that you do today to continue what you experienced in there, which sounds like it like truly transformed you, combined with the efforts of the 12-step.
Right. So I do hatha yoga. I have a meditation practice, so I have a daily practice, sometimes twice a day, sometimes more. It really does depend.
What does that look like? Because, meditation's one of those topics that people try to perfect. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on the best way that you've done it, but also like if somebody's out there and they're thinking about it, what's the best way for them to do it where it can become sustainable and impactable?
So for me, the simplest way is you can have, I've learned I've had mantras in 2 or 3 different kinds of disciplines in my exploration time, The thing that I think is a great jumping in point from almost anybody is if you can just pay attention to your breathing and that 4-4-4 breath. There's a lot of different forms of breathing techniques, but if I can, and then it's just building the discipline of doing it daily. Maybe start with a couple of minutes, expand it to 3 or 4 or 5. I've taught 4 and 5-year-olds to meditate in a church school, but we started them with 1 minute in the beginning, and then went to 2 minutes, and then to 3 minutes, and we never took them to more minutes than they were years old. And I do a meditation weekly now with a group of people. We get about 35 people there on average. And what we just do is we read the 11th-step prayer, and then I'll say, if you don't have a practice, maybe pick a word. And that prayer starts with be a channel, So if you can be a channel for something, Human Kindness Foundation taught me about just take peace in, absorb peace, and then send peace back out. That's super simple. And if you do that on a 4 breath in, hold for 4 breaths, soak up peace, send peace back out. That's pretty simplistic. Any other way you want to go and look at, there's every spiritual tradition has a meditation practice almost. I love James Nestor's book about breath. It's an amazing book because it talks about the science of breath work and how it can improve your health, physical, mental, spiritual, right towards the end of it. Now, this guy spent 10 years going around the world and studying different kinds of spiritual techniques, modern time ones, and tracking them back to 5,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago in their origins. The commonality is that no matter what someone's presenting it as today, almost all of them are very similar. And sometimes they're just called this, or they're called that, or they're called this, or they're called that. And if you jump in on one and just say, this is really the one, and everybody, I think when somebody finds a practice that works for them, they'll go, yeah, I hit a home run. And it's not any different than liking different kinds of ice cream or tofu or whatever. Not everybody's taste buds are exactly the same. When we meditate together with 35 people, nobody's doing it exactly the same as everybody else.
Yeah.
Other than we're all quiet for 20 minutes, And then they share about where they're at, which is a real freedom to not have to be like the other people.
Yeah.
Your way and the spot that you were going in, some people come in and go, man, I could never get centered. I just started doing my shopping list. And that's okay. They were quietly doing their shopping list, and that's not what I would say is maybe the perfect way to do it. But it's also just be honest about that. And your mind wanders, and that's what you got distracted on. That's okay.
It's like that awareness. I've had so many different breakthroughs in the practice of meditation, the practice of breath work, whether it was when someone would say, and if you drifted off and you're like focused on a thought, the minute you become aware that you're focused on a thought, just bring yourself back. That was one of my breakthroughs. But I feel like the biggest impact was when I realized that when I am focused on my breath as it's expanding my chest or as it's contracting my chest, that all my attention is on the present moment. And when I'm in the present moment, whatever worries, the thoughts stop. And it's the thoughts that kind of always keep me distracted or always keep me racing and never allow me the opportunity to slow down or to sometimes to just be with people where they're at or to see them for where they're at. And it's a practice that's lifelong. So it's something that I'm committed to dialing back into in 2025.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Positive Recovery MD. Don't forget to visit positiverecovery.com/podcast to sign up to get your daily positive interventions sent straight to your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to Positive Recovery MD on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts to receive an automatic download when a new episode drops. And as always, if you or someone you know needs help, visit positiverecovery.com or call 877-4-SOBRIETY. That's 877-476-2743. Our why is simple. We care. We are here to help.